In the spring of 1880, a traveling photographer arrived in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Dusty and bedraggled, the kid decided to pose for a 25-cent tintype.
The newspaper reporters are allowed in, and they get to talk to the kid. And as he's talking to the reporters, the kid says, you know, this is good. Maybe people will think I'm half human now, because they haven't thought I was human before. They've considered me an animal. Maybe now they'll think I'm half human.
He did look human indeed, one reporter wrote. There was nothing very mannish about him in his appearance, for he looked and acted like a schoolboy, with the traditional silky fuzz on his upper lip and clear blue eyes with a roguish snap about them.
He was always looking for a family. He wanted a home, and that's the one thing that he never really had and couldn't get. But I think he felt that Fort Sumner was home.
Well, probably the single most important thing to come out was in 1986 when they discovered the photo, the tintype of the kid. Because up until that, all we had was a lot of retouched old bad photos. And but when that came out, you could finally see his actual face and what he really looked like, at least to some extent, because the problem being with the only known photo of the kid is that people who knew him said it was a terrible picture of him. So he's basically being remembered by his driver's license photo.
That picture was taken, they doctored it. Okay, they tried to repair it from the get-go. And that is, and it was badly done, it was botched. And so what you saw, instead of this smart little Irish kid, you saw a moron. And so America only heard of this dirty little Billy killer, and there's his picture. Look, he's a moron. Well, nothing was farther from the truth.
Ladies and gentlemen, 279. Here's the piece everybody's been talking about a lot this past year. This is Billy the Kid and the tintype. Everybody in this audience is going to see and be a part of American history tonight. Hit 500,000, that'll get 500. Now 5 to meet. Hit 550,000, 600,000. I'm now 650,000. That's now 650,000. I'm now 750. 750,000. 750,000. Now 800,000. 800. Now 900,000. Now $1 million. 1 million one. 1 million two. No, you're out, Todd. Got $1 million two. $1 million two. Got me $1,200,000. $1 million two. I got $1 million one. Got me $1 million two. $1 million three. $1 million four. $1 million four. $1,750,000. The lowest I'm gonna go. 1819, 1819. Now 2 million. Now 2 million. 2 million one. Gotta be 2 million one. 2 million. 2 million one. 2 million. 2 million. 2 million one. And I sold it. 2 million.
Appalled by the fact that it sold for $2.5 million, because it, as you probably know, and if you don't, it's easy enough to explain, everybody who finds a picture that looks remotely like him immediately runs to the press or to anybody who'll listen and say, hey, look, I got a picture of Billy the Kid. The matter of its going into collectorship and therefore out of sight of us for the rest of its existence is to me is very sad. I'd like an awful lot of people to be able to see it, because it's magic.
On the anniversary of his death in Fort Sumner, we had a reenactment of his funeral, and I gave the eulogy. I cried a little bit because it was just very sad, and we just really want people to know how we see Billy the Kid, that he wasn't a murderer, he wasn't a cold-blooded, horrible human being. He was an outlaw, yes, and he killed people, yes, but he wasn't a bad guy.
He can identify with you, and you can identify with him if you've ever had a tough time in your life. Because the tough times that he went through were pretty serious. And you can look at them and say, well, I guess if he can get through that kind of shooting up, I can get through this. And so that's an encouragement to a viewer. Looking around it the other way, he's a very unlikely hero. He isn't particularly good looking, although everybody said he was very charming and very easy to get along with. But he was just another guy from nowhere, and still to this day is a man from nowhere. We don't know where he came from. We don't know how he got that self-confidence and poise that he clearly had, and he obviously didn't have any fear whatsoever, because he walked straight into the biggest gunfights that ever happened in these parts. The first encounter with Billy the Kid was when I brought my wife and 2 kids up here to see the places where it had all happened. They'd known about Billy the Kid from me for a long time because I was living in England writing about Billy the Kid there. And it was raining and Lincoln was closed. And it took us about an hour to find anybody who could tell us anything at all. And it was drizzling and it was miserable. And my wife said, "You brought me 5,000 miles to see this." And I eventually persuaded her that it was interesting. And we've been delving into the life and times of Billy the Kid and everybody associated with him for the past, believe it or not, 50 years. And we still don't know who he was. But Billy the Kid appeals to different people for totally different reasons. Some like the daring do, as they would call it in England. Some people like the mystery. Some people like the war in which he found himself embroiled. Some people like the idea of being the fastest gun in Texas, except it wasn't Texas, it was New Mexico. There's always a new facet to the story, and it never stops turning up new facets, no matter how fast we use them up. You and I would say, it's the kind of kid you'd want for your own son.
He didn't have his arm out like people might have. He so embraced our culture, our people. Somebody that was very respectful, very proper, and very formal in a Mexican sort of way, which we like our formality.
He had this innate charm. They often talk about sort of his swirly teeth and how his mouth was shaped, but it was always in a smile. That's what the Hispanic community always says. He was always smiling, always laughing.
When Henry was just 15 years old, his mother became gravely ill with tuberculosis. She had hoped the dry mountain air that banked off the Rockies and settled over the valleys would restore her health. But the galloping consumption, as it was then known, proved too much for Catherine. She died in Silver City in 1874.
The kid is a young teenager when his mom dies. Catherine is his one connection to stability. I mean, this is the mother that's raised you, that's made sure you were fed, that's sent you to school. But once Catherine's gone, the stepfather, William Antrim, doesn't really care about the upbringing of his stepson.
Antrim abandons the boy. I mean, to be out in this distant and strange land, and then to have lost the only connection you had to who you were and to your past, just has to be devastating.
You know, it was the Young Guns 2 movie, and it was like a 2x4 hit me upside the head. It really had such an impact on me. I couldn't explain why. It's just that I came home, and it was like something was haunting me or something. You know, I was just walking around in a daze trying to figure out how do I get to the bottom of this? I don't get it. Bottom line, I see him more as attempting to prevail as a freedom fighter, quote unquote, than, you know, just a, I want to kill people just to be killing them because I want a few coins and I want another bottle of whiskey or something, you know. Yeah, no, I almost felt like it was my life or something, or some component of something that was like a switch just went off, and I had to follow it.
He had a lot of friends. He had a lot of people hiding him through New Mexico and who would keep him safe. But he had so many enemies too that it was just hard. There's two sides of the story. Some people loved him, some people hated him. But I think a lot of people loved him. The story, it just gets under your skin. When you first start reading it, there's just something about him. He's heroic and daring and flashy and fun. And you just love the sense that he did everything he could to protect his friends. That's probably the biggest part of it. And he was just treated so badly by Lew Wallace for not giving him the pardon. He was gunned down in a darkened bedroom. The whole story is just epic.
I think it was his character. I think he was a loyal person. He was loyal to his friends. And despite being physically slight and being young, I think that he was brave. And I think he really cared about these people. The way that he grew up, I don't think he had a really strong sense of family. And so when he met these guys, they were his brothers. They were family to him. And so he was willing to do anything for them. And I think that's probably the coolest thing about Billy, and I think that's something that gets forgotten. He was outgoing, and he was popular, and he liked to talk and sing and dance, and he liked girls, and good for him. They liked him back. Billy, I think, is he's sort of like a mirror to the people who are interested in him. He as a person is pretty well documented, and he was an exciting, cool person. But I think now he's whatever you want him to be. On the end, I think over and over, as corny as it sounds, he made decisions out of love, out of kindness, because he cared about people. I think that's why he got involved in the Lincoln County War. I think it was because of his loyalty to Tunstall and to the other guys who were involved. And that's why he stuck around when he didn't have to, and that's why he did the things he did.
This whole story is like a Ulysses story. It's a great story. It's about deceit and love and dying for love and passion and right and wrong, and it just has all these elements.
I'm as fascinated by the legend of the kid, by why the kid is such a towering figure in American and world mythology, as I am with the real kid, which is a fascinating story, but it's really what we've made of him, this outlaw of our dreams, that has most fascinated me.
I think what we do is we get legends. It becomes like a religion. I believe this, so I wrote a book about it, and I don't want to rock the boat. And I think it's because we can't really separate ourselves from the legend and who these guys were.
It's hard to explain the lunacy that seems to surround the kid with modern enthusiasts, but it's easy to be drawn to him because, as I said earlier, he's kind of a symbol of rebellion. He kind of went against authority, and especially corrupt authority, and for that, he's admirable.
How he became the legend, that has to do with my line of business. We make legends, writers make legends, and I think there were enough writers around shortly after Billy's death and kept on going to the present day. And I'm sure when we're all turned up our shoes and gone, there'll be others coming along to do it all over again.
And maybe we all just put into him what we need him to be. That's a possibility, I don't really know.
He certainly has been a very resilient and a very malleable character for America. He could be the hero of the oppressed small farmers in the 1930s. He could be the hero of the angst-ridden, misunderstood teenagers of the 1950s. And he could be a tough gang leader, sort of the LA Crips go to New Mexico in Young Guns in the 1990s. Just keeps riding across the imagination of America and the world.
An orphan in a tough and transient mining town, it didn't take long for Henry to find trouble, or for trouble to find him. In the saloons and brothels in the center of town, Henry hustled to make a few bucks however he could. At night, he would bunk down in the boarding houses with a revolving cast of strangers. One of them, a streetwise petty thief named Sombrero Jack. On the afternoon of September 4th, 1875, Henry acted as lookout while Sombrero Jack robbed a Chinese laundry. When some of the plunder, including a loaded revolver, was discovered in Henry's room, he was arrested. Alone in a cramped 4x5 cell, Henry could hear the bustle of downtown Silver City through the tiny barred window. He knew it might take up to 3 months for a traveling judge to make it to this part of New Mexico. That was a lifetime to a 16-year-old.
One of the things about the kid, he was able to deceive people. He was able to get them to think that he was inconsequential.
Henry calmed the prison guard into granting him some time outside his cell. When the coast was clear, Henry, no more than 130 pounds with his boots on, forced his tiny frame up the chimney.
And the sheriff returns to the jail, and there's no kid. The cell's empty. The hallway's empty. Probably, it would have been a slap on the wrist had he stayed there. But with that jailbreak, he's a wanted man at the age of 16.
Henry decided to head west for Arizona, where he hoped to get a fresh start. With no horse, no gun, and little money, he was on the run in some of the most hostile land in the country.
This country was so bad, so wild, so dangerous. Just staying alive was a trick.
It even existed. I just kept getting these pulls that I needed to come down here and check out Lincoln County.
He's a hopeless romantic in a way because he's fighting for a way of life that is passing away. He's only 21 when he's killed, so he doesn't have a lot of time to engage in this battle. But his youth, his daring, his rebellious spirit, all of this appeals, I think, to the sort of romantic spirit in people.
My idea of the kid was that he, stood in the street and dared people to draw, and there was wanted posters, and he robbed trains and banks, and he never robbed a bank, and he never robbed a train, and he never stood in the street and dared anybody to draw, and his real name was Henry. It wasn't even Billy, and I was like, how many movies would you go see about Henry the Kid? Not very many, not 60 for sure. Then as I got deeper into the story, just realizing the rough men that he rode with and had to contend with and survive, because these are some mean guys, man. These guys still had the bark on, as they used to say.
To me, Billy represents a certain defiance of authority, which I like. But at the same time, he had personality coming out of his ears, which is the real key to his legend, too.
In a way, he's the ultimate American hero, because even though we as Americans believe very strongly in law and order, we also are born out of rebellion, and we love to root for the rebel. And Billy, of course, finally has to pay the price.
His friends admired him. He was a natural leader. He showed that. Even at his young age, he became a natural leader of men older than he, and they respected him.
He was very young, so he had to survive. He had to do whatever it took, and that takes a lot of gumption.
Either you see the kid as a dirtbag that needs to be killed, that shouldn't be breathing air as common people, or you see him as this romantic hero, Robin Hood kind of thing. And I think the way we should look at the kid is he's a guy. He's just like us.
Out of the fire come this innocent-looking little kid who was not. He took the side of Tunstall and the side of the Mexican people against the Anglo that had taken their country, the corrupt Anglos, the murdering Anglos, as a freedom fighter, Irish freedom fighter, fighting for their cause.
Well, I think that the part of the legend that endures is that you have this innocent-looking boy who is hanging with men who are so rough, and that's part of the eternal charm. When we read that perhaps Billy had grown a beard on the night he was killed, and the newspaper reported that, we don't like to read that. It was like, no, our boy is clean-shaven and he can't even raise a beard. That's because he's that young. And that's why a 9-year-old boy from Iowa would be enamored of him, because here he is, he's just like I am. And so that's the charm.
But it's kind of, I think his attitude, you know, he was young and he was, you know, kind of happy and fun-loving, but yet don't mess with him. And maybe those blue eyes told that story that, yeah, I can be smiling, but don't mess with me, you know.
There is a lot of mystery in the story of the kid. There's a lot we don't know. We may never know. And that simply fuels the imagination, and it allows both the writer, be it a film writer or someone writing a book or an article, or the artist who's making a sculpture or a painting, it allows some freedom within their craft, and so that makes him a very appealing subject for the artist.
I think what happened, I think Billy the Kid became Billy the Kid April 28, 1881, was the escape of the courthouse. That's when he became Billy the Kid. Had they hung him May 13th, he'd have been a footnote in history like the rest of it.
He was an entertainer, really was. In the old dances they'd have, you know, the bales they called them, it wasn't just dancing and music. This was the only time you had to socialize and talk. So it was storytelling and a joke you heard, and so-and-so did that, and I heard about old so-and-so. So it was a whole time to share news, all that kind of stuff. That was a social gathering, the dance. So the kid had come with a reputation, who was a hell of a dancer and very magnetic and all that stuff. He had the juice. And oh God, them Mexican girls were just nuts about him, and the Mexican men loved him too.
Wonderful is that there's new finds all the time. And we just, Mark Lee Gardner, the author of To Hell on a Fast Horse, he discovered online now, since so many newspapers are being put up online, he discovered a newspaper account that we thought was lost. And it was published in a paper in Colorado just after the kid's death. And we published that in True West because it was just so exciting to see so clearly and so soon after his death, so many of the tropes, so many of the things we believe about the kid today were right there immediate. This is like a week after his death.
Once again, Henry was back to hustling for money. He became a skilled gambler and dealer of three-card monte. And he fell in with a gang of seasoned outlaws who taught him the finer points of stealing horses. Soon he earned enough to buy the one thing he would need most to survive: a six-shooter.
It's an equalizer. If you want some instant respect, put on a six-shooter, and you're going to get that respect.
He quickly became very good with a gun. He learned how to handle himself, because you had to in order to get along out in that raw country.
On the evening of August 17th, 1877, the kid danced across a line from which he could never return when he ran into a local thug named Frank Cahill.
Wendy Cahill. He's a real boastful, outspoken bully.
He thought it was fun to slap this little guy around just to amuse the other patrons, and he did that one time too many.
He started really in on the kid. One thing led to another, and he got him down and was pounding him.
And the kid was working his hand towards a gun in his belt. And Cahill tried to stop him, but couldn't.
Belly shot is not a way to die. It took Cahill all night to die. But by that time, the kid had fled.
Murder is a hanging offense. This is quite a bit different than stealing something from a laundry. The kid really has reasons to be afraid. of being caught, and he's on the run. Even though if he had stayed, there could have been an argument made for self-defense, but the kid is not willing to take that chance.
The kid had killed a man. He had undergone a quick and fiery baptism from orphan boy to desperado. Now he could only count on his wits, his gun, and his horse.
I think it must have had a profound psychological impact upon Billy. Being still young, very impressionable, very vulnerable. You know, what does it mean to kill a man? And I think it further settled Billy into the role of an outlaw. I mean, after that, there was no turning back.
The Hispanos would have seen in the kid a person who was fighting their enemies. The people he was fighting against, even the ones who were on the side of the law, were crooks. The Hispanos knew that. These were not fine, outstanding citizens who were being gunned down. He was engaging against people who had stolen a whole country. He was engaging against people who had stolen their lands. The kid is a consistent rebel, rebelling against the new Anglo establishment. They're co-opting all the land grants. They're making themselves wealthy. And so when he strikes against the house, he's always striking a blow for those who are being dispossessed, the Mexican sheep herders. So it's not a very long journey to make him into this fighter for justice.